Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Environmental Coffee House. We are today talking about water bankruptcy with Antonio, and it's great to see you, Antonio. I am thrilled.
You too. Very good morning.
Yeah, so today, the topic came up because I ran into the UN a new report by the UN that came out in January, all
Yeah.
about water bankruptcy. And it works really well with what's happening in Iran that started in June, the bombing, the first bombing. I think it was in June. And it was very timely. So I'm just going to introduce the subject, and Tony has a whole introduction of his own. Now, as you see, and good morning, everyone. I just want to get right in. Good morning, everyone. This is the map. This is the area we're talking about. All of this is like our fourth show on this topic, on different various issues that are related to this war, really. It is. It's the fourth show. I thought it was the fifth, but it's the fourth. So here's the area, and we see Iran is, quite large. Well, what I really want to talk about is what is water bankruptcy. So what it isn't Iran isn't just facing drought. It's facing ecological bankruptcy. When aquifers collapse, lakes turn to salt deserts and dust storms replace farmland, and that damage can last centuries. Now, one more thing. In practical terms, the water bankruptcy, it's the combination of insolvency and irreversibility. Insolvency means we are withdrawing and polluting beyond renewable inflows and safe depletion limits, basically. And we meaning humanity in all these areas. You know, I we is a tough one, but it is humanity. It is human beings doing the destruction. It sure isn't the animals. They are just the victims. So Tony, why don't you take off where I started? And
Yeah.
welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is a very important topic, and it's increasingly getting a lot of attention, in part because of the war. But I also want for this audience to understand that the water crisis that we're facing, not only in Iran and the Middle East, goes well
Mm-hmm.
beyond, today's war or even the 12-day war. Of course, Iran has been struggling with water security for a long time, and so too has the broader Middle Eastern region. So, the first thing I want to do is context this in terms of water bankruptcy. As Sandy was talking about, water bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean that a country or municipality, a city, or what have you, is facing day zero of water, like what we saw in Cape Town, South Africa in 2018. You
Mm-hmm.
remember how that kind of stole away some of the headlines because this was the first time that a major city in South Africa is a very developed
Yep.
economy, was facing a major water crisis where they were going to be out of water. That's not necessarily what water bankruptcy means, but it certainly can entail reaching day zero. What water bankruptcy means, as Sandy was talking about, is that simply we are taking more water from our natural resources than those natural resources are able to renew themselves. So this can be underwater aquifers, ground systems, lakes, rivers, things of that nature, simply not getting enough rain. Those type of things will deplete our water resources. So this is obviously widespread, and it has a lot of important context for what's happening in the Middle East. I keep on bringing us back to a statement that then Vice President Kamala Harris said that for many generations, since the industrial age, and particularly in the last century, wars were fought over oil and access to oil, access to gas. And in large part, we still see this today. But what Kamala was warning us is that in a very short time, those were actually her direct words, in a very short time, wars are going to be fought over water. Why?
Yep.
Because in the background, before the bombs go off, there's already many crises underway. So I'm going to
Yep.
first context this in the situation what's happening in the Middle East in terms of the war. We're not going to focus a lot on that because we've already talked about the war. We're going to jump into Iran, but I want to keep I want to keep that in mind, how this is so important. And actually, this is more true for the American allies in the Middle East, or so-called allies, than it is for Iran. But Iran's going to give us a case study.
Okay.
So right now, there's a big conversation happening in America, happening in Israel, happening in Iran, and of course across the GCC countries about their access to water. Bombing water infrastructure in the Middle East is more important than bombing oil infrastructure in the Middle East. Notice that's why oil facilities have been attacked, and it's lower down on the escalation ladder than bombing desalination plants, for example. Now, that's incredible to understand, because people think about the global economy being hooked onto oil, and yet you can see that water in the Middle East is many times more important than oil. Here's why. Here's why. In the GCC countries, these are United Arab Immigrants, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. But what's interesting about the GCC countries, for example, is that you're going to find that in countries like Kuwait, that 90% of the water resources, that is their potable water, comes from desalination, not from underground aquifers, not from rivers or lakes, and not from rainfall. Much is true across Oman, where about 86% of their water is taken from desalination. Saudi Arabia itself is 70%. Qatar weighs anywhere between 85 to 90% of its water comes from desalination, which is absolutely crucial. For the UAE, 42%, in Bahrain, somewhere around 65 to 70% of its water comes from desalination. So you have to understand, with such a heavy reliance on desalination, to take any one of their plants offline would immediately plunge their populations into utter crisis. And it's impossible, think about this, it's impossible to get these desalination plants back online in time to avert a crisis. So once they go down, you are immediately in crisis unless the international community comes in with water aid. Otherwise, your population is out in the desert with no access to water. And this is true across the GCC countries. This is why attacking desalination plants is much more important than attacking oil plants, because if you can get the oil back online, people aren't going to immediately die. Within a week or two, you have an absolute crisis in these countries. So what's interesting, though, is that Iran, and this is why a lot of geopolitical strategy thinkers are thinking that Iran has such an advantage. Only 5%, 3 to 5% of its potable water comes from desalination, which puts them in a completely different arena. And here we're going to talk about the myriad of crises that exist in terms of water access in Iran, in terms of water bankruptcy in Iran. But it's just important to keep that also in know. That they've not addressed this through desalination, the GCC countries have, and that makes them completely more vulnerable to all of these crises, okay?
Right.
So that's enough with the international or the Gulf perspective. But just to keep that in mind, that these countries are really, really vulnerable to water stress, and face water stress is a daily existential crisis, okay? So what's happening in Iran, though, quite detached from the war itself, has been going on for decades. Iran is facing an acute water crisis, okay? Iran has faced water bankruptcy across over 800 municipalities in Iran, okay? Can you bring up the map in Iran, and that can kind of be the background a little bit if I go into this. So why? Well, there are several reasons why. Can you zoom in on Iran so people can get a more perspective? And I like to do that because I know that a lot of Americans, this part of the world is foreign. It can
Did I
overshadow
get that? Yeah.
It's fine.
Hang on. Nope. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why I want to talk about this, because for Iran, the water crisis is part of the ongoing ecological and environmental crisis that humanity is in part because of overpopulation. Iran is a country of 90 million people, and it's an Arab country. It's in the desert, okay? It gets very little rainfall. But also, you have extreme agriculture going on in Iran that would not be possible if it wasn't for industrial activity. And we'll talk a little bit more about the
Exactly.
agricultural sector. Um, and what's also happening in Iran, like elsewhere in the world, is they're suffering from droughts. 6 consecutive years of drought, leading from the 2020 to 25 period. Um, Also, rain in many areas across Iran has declined drastically, anywhere from 40 to 80% in some areas. And then also absolutely devastating heat waves that absorb, just suck whatever moisture is in the ground out, over 120-degree conditions in some parts of Iran during these heat waves that they've been increasingly experiencing as an effect of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way that Iran has largely responded to this, of course, is by developing their underground water extraction resources.
Right.
Um, but there's only a limit to, well, there's a lot of consequences to doing something like that. The first consequence, of course, is that you're going to start getting into water bankruptcy, right? Because those underground aquifers take a long time to refresh or to recharge, and even more so during a climate stressed era where you've already seen 40 to 80% reduction in annual precipitation in some areas, and also you're facing extreme heat, like 120 plus degrees. So with these combination of factors, the underwater resources in Iran are quickly dissipating. And it's leading to subsidence of the land. That's another problem that's happening in Iran. Some 83 centimeters a year. That's showing that in some aquifers are depleting by almost 6 feet a year. I mean, this is huge amounts of water resources being used. Now, of course, this has to happen because actually not the drinking population. One of the things that me and Sandy keep on talking about and want to stress is that there are two things happening here that you need to think about in terms of human civilization stress on the planet. The first thing is, of course, what humans require. We require food, we require space, and we require water, right? Well, very little, not very little, but a lot less, much, let me say it like this. Um, Most of the water stress that's happening in Iran actually has to do with the agricultural sector. About 80 to 90% of the water in Iran goes to agriculture. Okay. And the reason why that is because Iran, because of the international situation with the sanctions, Iran has moved to become agriculturally independent. So it grows things like alfalfa. It grows things like rice, which is, I mean, everything on this list is extremely water intensive. Pistachios, sugar beets, watermelons, wheat is a huge
Yeah,
product.
diversity of farming. A diverse, very diverse.
Well, it's very diverse in each of the crops. The cash crops it grows are also very water intensive. So diverse, but still each of the crops are water
Yes.
intensive. And that's why, in part, they're in problem. So a lot of it, so the wheat, the rice, this is directly for the domestic population. But when you start talking about the pistachios and the alfalfa, I mean, this is for foreign markets. And so Iran is trying to become increasingly an economy that has an international mix, right? That it
Right.
has multiple products to bring to market other just than its oil supplies. And in order to do that, these are extremely water intense cash crops. And so one response that Iran has had is desalination. But as I stated, and as you saw before, desalination in terms of response makes up only 3 to 5% of the total water that Iran takes in each year. So it's not a viable answer for Iran to go in that direction. And even if they did develop, desalination technologies, they would only make themselves more vulnerable in attempts of attacks on their water infrastructure. So it's not a viable option to move in that direction. Now, one of the things that Iran can do, though, is begin better water management systems,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that infrastructure is upgraded so that it doesn't leak, and also reducing their water footprint by moving to less water intensive cash crops. If Iran does this, they will severely, and it actually, again, mostly agricultural problem, 89%. So as they move away from these sort of crops, they can really reduce their stress level when it comes to water bankruptcy. And this is why I say, so Iran's kind of in a unique situation because although they do face outside of risk, either from international relations or from the ongoing climate crisis, a lot of it is self-induced because of it's economic driven. And because it's economically driven, it gives Iran options. Now, if they're not intelligent and they continue down this road, which it looks like they'll be doing, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they're going to hit day zero. As I've already said,
Right.
over 800 different towns, locales, and municipalities across Iran are suffering already from acute water stress and risk. And so the question now that they're facing international conflict is how do they want to address these problems? Do they want to worsen them by continuing in the same direction? Or is there going to be a sort of government style change in its direction of how it wants to develop its agricultural sector?
Very, very important points. All of them. I mean, very, very important. So, when you talk about the agriculture, and it does use almost all the water, that was what I read 80, 90%. 80
Yeah.
to 90% goes to the fresh water, goes. And they are still using, a lot of them are still using what's called flood irrigation. And that
Yeah.
uses so much water, so much water. And their
So part
crops.
of it,
Yeah.
so you see that underdeveloped technologies, low investment, and
Yes.
then also highly intensive crash crop demand for water is a combination of factors. Is the reason why Iran is losing this, but also gives them so much potential in terms of actually responding to the crisis. But some of this is going to be done by outside help, right? There are technologies across the markets, whether they be in China, the United States, or in Europe, where they can develop them in Iran and become much more effective with the distribution of their water systems.
Right.
And this would have an immediate gain for the Iranians. They would have to invest less in desalination, which is, again, their plan. That's how they want to move forward, but recognizing geopolitically that that's not the best plan for them.
Right.
And also, those things are very expensive to maintain. It's much cheaper to make have much better water irrigation systems than to build desalination plants or to have water imported in.
So, what do you think about the? Because I also read about the thousands of illegal wells that were drilled in the country to keep the agriculture going. And that, I mean, it said hundreds of thousands of wells were drilled without regulation, and the farmers were pumping groundwater just, freely. And that's it's tough.
Well, and that's a huge problem is the decentralization around the agricultural system. It really provides an incentive, and because you don't have a replenishing of those natural resources,
Right.
and obviously these local farmers don't have access to capital where they can
No.
build these modern migration systems. So what they end up doing is just whatever they can, drilling these illegal ad hoc makeshift rigs,
Right.
wells, and drain the water resources even faster. So it really is a race to the bottom. And that's why I think the Iranian government really has to step in here and ensure that, at least for its agricultural sector, that it is managing its water resources much more viably than what they are right now. And that would reduce the stress on its farmers to seek and to build these illegal wells. And they also have to pass policy to make it illegal. There's a lot of problems with draining underwater aquifers this way, and a part of
Oh
this
my
is an
God.
infrastructural problem. If the land subsides, buildings sometimes will lose their foundations and become unstable. We see this all the time. So, and there's a lot of other problems with crops above ground uses. So it's very dangerous that they're doing this, and they're doing it at such a large scale. And it also makes it more difficult for government officials to keep track of how much water is actually disappearing.
Well, one of the other problems there is they have a very fragmented way of management. In these, they have ministries that control. So the different ministries were controlling agriculture and energy and environmental protection. So it's conflicting with each other. And that was another problem with the waste and poor planning. So they can, it would be in the world's best interest, which is I probably hopium now with what's happening actually. I mean, they had crazy urban growth. They had a lot of growth in Tehran, but now it's all going to be spread out because of this war. The things that are going to change. I mean, that city in Tehran alone has like 10 million people. That's a lot of the natural water resources also. And that was
Oh,
one of the
sure.
gigantic
Uh,
things. Yeah.
yeah, but still, even comparing that, the amount of water that's used on agriculture, that's why I say they have such an opportunity here to reduce this crisis if they head in the right direction. But that is a big fear. As people, and by the way, there were research that showed that, to respond to the Turanian problem, what's happening in Tehran, is that people ought to evacuate the city. This was well before the war
That's
because
what.
of
Hmm.
some of the water crises there. But as people leave Iran and they go to, or excuse me, Tehran, and they go to other places in Iran, what happens is that they'll be causing water demands to spike. And as I said already, over 800 different locales and municipalities across Iran are already facing acute water stress. So having more people from Tehran spread out into smaller towns and cities actually will just disperse
Right.
the problem and compound it wherever it goes, because people are going to need their daily requirement of water. So it has to be a top down approach, because again, so much of the water resources are being focused on one sector of the economy, and that's agriculture.
Okay. Would you like to watch the video I put together?
Yeah, oh,
All
absolutely.
right, let's take a little break and watch this video because I put this together and I think that it'll help you guys understand even better, really. Hang on.
Analysts are saying that we should also be looking at the ecological, environmental factors behind the discontent in Iran, and many pointing to water shortages. The country has been gripped by a very severe drought for the past 6 years, and many cities are now on the verge of what experts call water day zero or water bankruptcy, a limit beyond which water supply systems essentially collapse, and there's no more water available. And the most dramatic symbol of that situation, water shortages, is the capital itself, Tehran. And that's because several of the reservoirs supplying the city of 10 million people are now, very close to being completely dried out. And so 5 major reservoirs supply the capital there. And according to a research by the Center of Strategic and International Studies from June to November of last year, those reservoirs, water levels fell to very dangerous low levels. They used satellite images to visualize what exactly that meant, what the drought has really created in those areas. And what you see there, for example, is one of the reservoirs, Lar, in June. And just a couple of months later, that's what it looks like, losing about 70% of its volume. So really very severe drought. And it has reached a point in Iran in which authorities authorities are now even considering moving the capital, Tehran, from the north of the country to southern coastal areas, remote areas, which are known to be wetter as well. That could cost about $100 billion. But of course, with the current national and geopolitical crisis, there hasn't been a lot of more details on whether this would actually happen or not in the future.
All right, so how did Iran get to this point? Climate change or mismanagement?
Well, it's both. I mean, from a scientific perspective, of course, the data shows us that average temperatures in cities in Iran have risen twice as fast as the global rate. Rainfall levels also dropping in Iran. But the scientific community, which has been silenced when it comes to water shortages, is also very clear on saying that this is the result of decades of mismanagement in Iran. We were talking about dams earlier. So Iran went on a dam building spree in the 20th century, becoming one of the biggest dam builders in the world. The reason being is that they wanted to respond to growing water demand in cities. But what eventually happened was quite the opposite, and that created many of the problems that they are facing today. Dams were built on rivers too small to sustain them, and so that has increased the loss of water with evaporation as well in very large surface areas, and that has also limited the flow of water downstream. And so it has exacerbated, it really made the problem worse in many ways. Underground in deep aquifers, the situation is even worse. The country being shut from global trade, Iran very quickly went on a strategy of food security and food self-sufficiency. That meant the government heavily subsidized the use, agricultural water use. And as a result, agriculture is now responsible for 90% of the country's water demand. And that is really huge. And so that led to farmers, building more wells, extracting more water from deep aquifers, pumping more and more. And that has led to a situation where there were almost twice as many wells in Iran now than a decade ago. And so you see there a vicious circle of more overpumping and aquifers becoming drier and drier.
Water bankruptcy is not just an environmental issue, it's social injustice and puts a lot of people into very difficult situations. So I'm going to relate this to Iran and what is happening there right now. As you know, water mismanagement has been a problem that people have been dealing with and actually driven people to the streets many times. But this time, farmers are also angry and they took it to the streets again. And you absolutely follow the news and everything that is happening. So can you tell us how much water mismanagement actually is impacting the protests in Iran and is the main reason for the protests and people coming to the streets?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I think the people of Iran should be answering that question, not me. But as someone who has worked on Iran matters, I would say, of course, like any other place, in environmental issues, employment issues that are water related. Increasing food prices, electricity prices, or like other issues and interruptions and disruptions can create anger, can result in tension. But reducing security problems of countries or tensions like this to a water problem or a shortage episode would be irresponsible. I think I would say I go further and say it's unethical, because I have seen recently some analysis and some even op-eds that claim that water issues drove the current situation. There is no evidence that people chanted for water. They had clear requests for water. And guess what? Iran is in its winter right now. So people came out in the street after some episodes of rain and snow. Ski resorts were open in many places, and the threat of day zero had gone away. So yes, 2 months ago the country was suffering from those issues, but it was a relief. But then we cannot single out water and say that other matters like air pollution, electricity issues, the exchange rates of currency depreciation, and other matters did not play a role. But I think it's a lesson for the world that water plays a major role in creating stability in countries, but also a lesson for academics, media, and others who want to analyze a country, that we cannot produce simple narratives because we want to advocate for a certain, I would say, message, or promote a certain message in defense of, the importance of climate change or the water issues. So I think we should be more responsible and understand the cause of people before we put out our narrative in the media.
I thought that was a very important statement. And that was from the UN. And that was the UN had a meeting, a water policy roundtable, but that was from January, of course, before.
Yeah.
But it's the water policy roundtable and the launch of the global water bankruptcy report that got me started on this whole thing. So we can talk about that further. I just wondered what you have to add now.
Yeah, so as stated before, Iran is facing a myriad of different problems because trying to address its water crisis. And one of the responses that was mentioned in the newscast was, Iran's government building these dams. Well, at first that appeared to be somewhat of a release stress factor. But of course, things eventually got worse. 19 of those dams now lie completely empty. 7 to 14% of Iran's reservoirs are full, which is absolutely devastating. And ultimately, building these dams did not give Iran the water security that it desperately needed. The Urmai dam is completely dry. And so responding that way has not only been problematic in terms of getting to the heart of the problem, but has actually made the problem substantially worse.
Right.
So again, as I was saying, where Iran can make serious gains in dealing with its, that's a beautiful picture of seeing exactly how
That's
acute
the
the crisis
lake.
is.
That's the lake.
Yeah. So what Iran could do that would make substantial benefits is that move from surface water irrigation. They don't even have what's considered moderate irrigation systems. So moving to a more moderate irrigation system, or even moving to drip irrigation systems, would reduce the amount of water that is necessary for each plant between 85 to 90%. Now, still, these cash crops are extremely water intensive cash crops. So even with a drip irrigation system, you're still going to be using relatively a lot of water to keep those plants going. But just moving there, they could save between 25 and 35% on their water usage. That's a huge, huge win, as I said before. But if the Iranians were to get smart and they started moving to plants like saffron or sesame seed or medical plants, which are just on average very, very, very low water intensive plants, then they could save an additional 25%. And so we're talking about a total savings in the agricultural sector somewhere between 50 to 70% if they move in the right direction. Okay. Now, this will not alleviate all the problems facing in Iran, but it certainly will take a lot of pressure off of them and give them access to water in other areas that they have not yet had. But that's only if they go in this direction. If they don't go in this direction, which they've not been, then they're going to face an absolute water crisis across the entire country. Now, part of this, again, as I said, is access to international markets. Drip irrigation systems for Iran are well outside of their own domestic technology. So this is something they're going to
Right
have to
now, But Gaza even had irrigation. I made a whole video about where drip irrigation was actually invented in Israel, and
Yeah.
it went further. But Gaza had drip irrigation, so it's not the technology
Well,
exists.
Gaza got drip irrigation as part of the peace talks
Yeah,
concession. So that was under, but that's what I'm saying. So a lot of this is also politics. So
sure.
if the politics were less intense and countries were more cooperative, Iran could get these technologies in. And also, one of the plans.
Cooperative other countries. That is a big issue now, especially now. It's so awful.
And one of these problems again is the fact that because international relations are so let's say aggressive right now, Iran has moved to a system where it's trying to be
Right.
self-sustainable, self-sufficient when it comes to food production. Well, you have a growing population of 90 million people, and you're trying to feed all of these people essentially on land. And so what you have to do is grow a lot of wheat. So that's always going to be a major component, no matter what direction they go in. So the only thing that they could do to reduce their water intensity would be to import a lot of that food agriculture. So in one sense, that would make them more vulnerable to changes in international relations and international trade. And that's the reason why Iran doesn't want to go in that situation. And then second, they have to make sure that they're able to feed their population. And so what they're doing is using their domestic resources to do that. But using those domestic resources more intelligently with better management strategies is going to yield a lot better for the Iranians.
And also, again, I had talked about the political, the modernizing how they govern the water. So better coordination between those ministries that are in the country. I know that they have a new, right now that's not the first thing on their mind, but they could do a unified national water authority all together for the whole country, aligning the agriculture, the energy, and the environmental policies together, and using the long-term water planning across the river basin. So this is critical. It's going to have to happen when all this the dust clears,
And
so to
I think,
speak, and the
right,
dust is bad.
right, and I think that this actually provides a moment of destructive creation for Iran, that they are facing a lot of destruction, and it gives them an opportunity to have a tabula rasa type moment where they can have a blank slate and
Right.
really rethink about how to engage these issues. Now, as I said, now having that more broad context in the Middle East, this is why Iran is really in a particularly different situation than the other GCC countries that I named earlier,
Okay.
because Iran has so much ability to actually respond to its crises, right? It has so much potential in terms of water savings when it comes to the agricultural sector. It has so much potential when it comes to water management. It has so much potential when it comes to centralization of water authorities. It has so much potential in terms of changing the sort of plants that it grows that are less water intrusive. This just isn't true across the GCC. And that's why I think Iran is particularly advantaged here.
That's really interesting. That
Yeah.
is. It really is. Well, I like that. Another thing that I think would be very helpful in that country after my studying is recycling the water, the wastewater. I mean, all of the cities that have so much water that can be reused, I know that they started it. They've started with the urban wastewater treatment networks and recycling water, and it could be used for the agriculture and the industry because industries need cooling, landscaping, groundwater recharge. That's another thing I saw. And I have a video. Iran historically used these things called qanats, Qanats. I have a cute video on that. These underground tunnels that transported the groundwater to the farms without draining the aquifers, and it was working for 2,000 years. And it maintained all these natural recharge rates that I read about, and it really avoided over pumping, and the modern pumping replaced them. And that's another part of the aquifer, the accelerated. So we should look at that video I have because it's really sweet. You want to take a look at that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody, we aim to please. And this one actually I really enjoyed. I enjoyed this one so much. So let's take a look at this one. Hang on, and I will set it up.
There are a lot of canals in Iran, and it is estimated that the length of these canals is the same as the distance between the Earth and the Moon. It takes its name from the Semitic word meaning to dig. These structures are horizontal tunnels with a gentle slope that partly cuts through the aquifer and drains underground water from saturated layers. Then falls on the ground, transfers to different areas near and far to irrigate farmlands and pastures. Mr. Nabipur, with 102 years old, is considered as the oldest and the most experienced Mirab, a person who is in charge of the water distribution system. To residents, he is also the oldest teacher who has dedicated his life to preserve canals and to train people throughout his life.
این قنات مایه زندگی ما با جد و نسل ما بوده وظیفه اینه که تا نفس آخر حمایت کنیم از این قنات بمیری این قنات ها اینجور که مریض هستن اینا ما میره آخرش با فاصله چند سال دیگه از وقت قنات ها توجه نکنم اینا که بمیری ما پشت سر اینا مرم.
He is still concerned about maintaining this cultural grand heritage and transferring it to the next generation. Living in the desert and knowing the harshness there, he is completely aware of the importance and value of this cultural grand heritage as a system that is getting life from nature and giving it back in harmony with nature.
قنات مایه زندگی مانی هستن هستی مایه قناتوی
I absolutely loved it. I really did.
Yeah.
And since I've been studying this, and I'm absolutely heartbroken, just heartbroken over what's happening, I think that Iran would be a fascinating country to visit. I have been looking at China and Iran specifically, two very different countries, two in the West, two controversial countries which should not be, but I think two amazing countries I would love to visit. And China has so modernized everything. So Iran and China together could really swap a lot of ideas. I know
Well,
the
increasingly that
West
is
would
what
hate that. Hate
that's
that.
increasingly what is happening as global international relations continues to reorient closer and around China. One of the breakthrough relationships I think that we are going to continue to see develop is that between China and Iran. It's been slow because of the Western relationship that Iran has. China doesn't want to see itself as a pariah state or taking on a similar reputation as Iran simply by association. But 13% of Chinese energy comes from Iran. A lot, and that makes up, I think, what, 40 or 50% of Iranian exports of oil and natural gas go to China. So China for Iran is a major player, and then China's Belt and Silk Road Initiative also goes through Iran. So, and of course, these countries have ancient histories and relationships with one another. Iran being going the Silk Road going through Iran, the original Silk Road. So there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of history there between these countries, these Asian ancient empires and peoples. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, I was very fascinated looking at the traditional clothing of the men in ancient Persia, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I wish that Americans and Iranians had a relationship where we could help them and they could help us, and we could go to their country and see what's going on, and really have them be a part of our, not just our international relation, but this broader human family that we all share.
I know.
So
I know. I mean, look at all the beautiful countries there. What's happening? The countries like Saudi Arabia, all what's happening between them and the United States, at least since the Trump administration has come in, it's all finances. It's all personal enrichment by the Trump family and the associates. That's the problem. It's not what it should be. It's not a people to people thing. It is not. And that's what it, I guess that's what hurts me. Maybe it's naive on my part.
well, unfortunately, with Western engagement in the Middle East, it hasn't been about development. It's been about development of certain resources and the extraction of those resources,
Absolutely.
not the development of the peoples. Now, the GCC countries have been smart in negotiating that this extraction was going to lead to the development of their peoples, but also look how vulnerable that's left them. The GCC countries are very, very, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council
Right.
countries,
Right.
are very interesting countries in terms of their relationships, right? Ordinarily, you would think a country like the Saudi Arabia and the United States would not be friendly. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is an extreme country when it comes to its domestic politics, and also internationally,
And
it's a
women.
pariah. It's a sponsor of international state-supported terrorism, and much of that terrorism against the West itself. So you would think that the United States would not have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, but because, as you say, because of the finances, because of the Saudi Arabian access to their oil fields,
Yep.
they have an extremely intense relationship around really the petrodollar. And that's why the United States is so willing to put so much military assets around the GCC countries, because it's American access to energy.
That's it. And we are seeing, to me, it's such a breakdown in moral values in the last 10
Well,
years. Of
no, it's not just the last 10 years, though. I mean, this is
Well,
really, we talk about Iran, but remember how
here in our country, it's just accelerated. Well, we
it
watch
certainly
the
has
corruption.
accelerated. It certainly has
Okay.
accelerated. That I won't disagree with. But you got to remember our relationship with Iran going back to 1953 around
Hmm.
Operation Ajax. The whole reason why that happened was the nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian oil company.
Right. We
Today,
didn't like that.
British Petroleum.
Yep.
This is the problem, because this has been the crux of our relationship with Middle Eastern countries, really since after the Second World War. And this relationship has been very hostile, very abusive, and not human centered, and certainly not ecologically centered in any way. And what I think this proposes for Iran, though, is an opportunity to readdress this relationship internally, right? Moving away from systems where it has to be either so oil intense or so water intense. And I think that way they'll become more self-sufficient, and they'll save a lot of money and resources doing this too. And they can divert those monies and resources to their own population instead of agriculture and infrastructure.
Something I read was shifting their economy away from water heavy industries could help them also with this getting back to water bankruptcy. I
Yeah.
don't know all the industry there, But what I did read was about putting industries closer to the coast and using, even though you talk about using the desalinated water, it's a that it's should be maybe not as focused, but using that for the recycled water for industrial production and reducing their water intensive use actually inland. So what can you tell me about what you researched?
Yeah, so in terms of industry, there are some gains that they can make. Their industries, moving them closer to the coast, again, is geopolitical. They don't want to do that because that will put them in striking range for the Americans, and it'll be much more take their industry offline. And
Right.
so you have these industries develop where they are, again, not just because of ecological factors or even internally economic factors, but also because of geopolitical factors. But even still, if I was at the, let's say I would not want to be the head of the Iranian government, but let's say if I were, my main focus would be moving away from certain cash crops to reduce water intensity, and then also developing irrigation systems that will effectively cut. So what I would do, moving to a drip irrigation system and then moving certain cash crops completely off of the table. So we got to keep rice, we have to keep wheat, but we can move away from alfalfa. Move away from alfalfa. We can move away from pistachios and a whole host of others, watermelons, things like that, and move toward things that are more natural to the area, and also move to plants that have medicinal use. Therefore, giving us an incentive to develop our medical technologies as well and our medical sector. So again, to have less energy intensity in the economy and make it more of an intelligence economy. One of the things that we have to do when we talk about growth is we don't just want to decouple growth from energy use, oil use, fossil fuels. We also want to decouple growth from water usage as well. So we can grow our economy by developing intellectual sectors like medicine, which will reduce our water footprint and also still grow our economy.
Are you speaking as if you are the Ayatollah?
Well, but
Yeah.
this is what I say. If I was,
Yeah.
having a plan for
Right.
the Iranians, this is how I would target this. And also, I would make it illegal for farmers to simply build their own wells. There has to be a permitting process that has to take place for them to do that and ensure that law enforcement. But we wouldn't lead the farmers out. We would either move them to systems, they already get water subsidies. We'll transfer those water subsidies into irrigation system subsidies. And
Right.
so we can move some of the farmers, instead of going to sort of mega corporate structure for agriculture, we can put them in unions where farmers in the region manage the crops that we want to grow. And for farmers that lose out, we can have them participate in other sectors of the agricultural economy. So they
Right.
don't always have to be directly farming or directly farming the same type of crops. So this strategy, I think, will be a popular strategy that keeps families and people who are native to the land without bringing in big corporations to take over the agricultural sector, enabling those jobs to remain with the local population. Um,
I
but
like it.
they need that support in terms of the subsidy. They need that support in terms of the policy, and they need that support in terms of law enforcement. Um, and so, if they get those three dimensions, I think that they can effectively manage, and of course, education, effectively manage their water systems when it comes to agriculture.
So, in terms of what's happening with the war and the war economy, the building, I guess a lot of the resources are going into defense and into building things of that nature. I mean, if again, we're just fantasizing. But again, if you were to be the person geopolitically that was in that country, that was leading that country, what would you like to see for them as a political entity, as a for their people? what would you like to see? What is the world like want to see without war? Forget Israel right now and all that shit. We're talking about the people there. These are wonderful people in that country. I mean, they're people that are just like want to go to school, want to educate their kids, want to have a good way of life.
So one of the things that Iran desperately needs is a infrastructure bill across all sectors of their economy. When it comes to housing, when it comes to water, when it comes to energy, when it comes to the grid, all this needs to be updated in Iran. They have plenty of money or plenty of opportunity to spend money on upgrading their domestic infrastructure, which is very crucial. Education is another major sector they could pour a lot of money into. I was talking in particular about medical technologies because they also have so much opportunity to have a medicinal agricultural sector. So these are two places that I would start with Iran, but also in terms of tourism. I think they could increase their tourism as well, inviting more people into Iran. And that will allow the international community to build a relationship with Iran,
Right.
not just to have a political relationship at the UN or things like that, but Iran can become a Middle Eastern hub. And it's a very beautiful country, and it has a rich culture. And I think that they can really take advantage of that too. So in Iran, in terms of its religion, actually, it's a lot less theocratic than you think. A country like, I mean, some of the GCC countries had to really reduce their religious standards, but those are very, very religious countries, and they've had to really think about how can we be a tourist hub, and we're also this ultra theocratic
like
religion,
like Dubai.
like Dubai, like Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, yeah, but
These countries,
now,
yes.
but we have to rethink all that. They're rethinking their relationships now because of this aggression from the United States and Israel. Because Iran now started to bomb American sites in these countries, and people are saying, "Well, it's over for them. Dubai is done. It's over." Do you think that? I mean, I know this
So
is about
it
water,
will
but
it will have to right now, and this was strategic on the part of the Iranians to take away that aura of invincibility, of comfortability that Westerners could go to these countries and find themselves. I remember a statement that President Obama said, right, of these international elites, that they could be just as comfortable in a place like New York or in Johannesburg or in Berlin or Shanghai. Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, these places also want to be on that list, right? That, these powerful, rich people, Westerners, whomever they are, the elite globally, you can also come here, and this can be a playground just as safe as Manhattan or Los Angeles or Hong Kong. But that image has now been completely eroded because, of course, there aren't these type of attacks in places like Hong Kong or Tokyo or in Johannesburg. So these attacks don't happen in France. They don't happen in Paris. They don't happen in Madrid. And they didn't happen in Abu Dhabi. They didn't happen in Kuwait. They didn't happen in Dubai. And now these images of, the international airport in Dubai, which is now world famous, a hub for the Middle East and a connector between the two worlds, the West and the East, being on fire, terminals on fire, filled with smoke. These images are going to be seared. I mean, my mother's friend just went to Dubai last year on vacation. These images are going to be seared in American minds for at least a generation. And
yep,
as the war continues to progress,
yep.
my God, this is why Israel has put a social media ban on anyone in Israel trying to show the damage from these
I
Iranian
know.
attacks.
I've seen
They don't
that.
want they don't want
It's
Israel
horrible.
to lose its tourist industry, right? Millions of people flock to Israel every year to see the Western Wall, to see the Dome of the Rock, to see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is supposed to be the first church of Christianity. So people, this era of international tourism appears to be coming to an end, where nationals feel safe getting passports, getting on commercial flights, and going to these other countries around the world. You have now thousands of nationals hundreds of thousands of nationals being trapped in these countries, not able to get home, not able to talk to their families. It's a very scary situation. And for tourism, no one needs to actually get hurt themselves. All you need is the shock, the
Right.
fear of being hurt to end tourism. And so an era has essentially ended for a generation.
I wonder though, think about the positives of ending tourism. A lot less fossil fuels, a lot less flying. I mean, things we don't need to do as a humanity is experiencing a climate crisis and overshoot
Well,
and
but
all
those
that. So
people ultimately will be flying somewhere else, right? So instead of a New Yorker going down to Abu Dhabi, maybe they'll take a flight to Taipei.
right.
So they'll just move directions. They won't necessarily not fly. But I do hear you there. Now, like I said, it's very interesting because as relationships break down internationally and as countries become more militaristic and as they become more surveilled, this is going to impact people's trustworthy. If I go to this country, am I going to be able to leave? If I go to this country, am I going to get hurt?
Like
If I go to this
people feel like about this country right now, America,
what
United
people,
States.
well, very, very well, exactly, in part because of our own crackdown domestically with internal immigrations, custom and border patrol. And as countries see these hardline moves, people are going to be less willing to. In fact, the American tourist sector has taken a huge hit when we started to crack down with ICE, because countries really want to know: are my human rights going to be respected? Is this a country that respects international law? So even if there is a problem, we could adjudicate this through an international process. All this is now being thrown into question.
All of it. I'd like. I know that we started off. We're talking about water, which really is the crux of a lot in the world. As you say, you destroy people's water, you destroy people's life, you destroy
Yeah.
people's livelihoods. We go back, but there's a lot more at stake for all of these countries. And I would like you to, in the interest of time, give us the broad circle of what we've talked about today.
Yeah. So we first started with understanding what water bankruptcy is and understanding that actually it's not just a problem that is localized to, we say, Phoenix, Arizona, or the southwestern United States, but this is really a global problem. And in so doing, trying to focus on the different aspects of what does it mean to be water bankrupt, being water insolvable, and also going beyond the point of irreversibility. In terms of draining natural water resources that locales and municipalities might have, people have access to. And then more broadly speaking about the Middle Eastern context, particularly in the context of the ongoing war with the GCC countries getting large amounts of their water resources from desalination. And then interestingly enough, we were talking about that actually isn't a problem in Iran. That's one of the problems that Iran doesn't have with its water. It doesn't get the majorities of its water from desalination, only some 3 to 5%. However, Iran is a country that is facing water bankruptcy because it's in a situation where it's draining all of its natural water resources and doing so at a much faster rate than they're able to replenish them. Over 80 to 90% of the water resource in Iran goes to its agricultural sector because a lot of its cash crops are water intensive. So we're talking about wheat, rice, watermelons, alfalfa, etc. We also talked about the significant potentials that Iran has in terms of reducing their water usage when it comes to developing an irrigation system. They could have a drip irrigation system that would save them between 25 to 35% in terms of acute use when it comes to particular plants, but also they can move away from certain plants that are a lot less water intrusive. We talked about medicinal plants that they could move to. We talked about moving to sesame seeds instead of pistachios, things of that nature, and that would also give them another 20-25% gain in the reduction of water usage when it comes to agricultural system. But we also talked about broader infrastructure water management systems that don't leak, don't waste, and recycle water more effectively. And this gives Iran a host of different options that it can pursue. But also we talked about its politics. We need a situation where they have centralized management of water systems, a permitting system, not just allowing farmers to ad hoc makeshift build wells and begin draining from the aquifer systems. More management of this, law enforcement and permitting can reduce this from happening. So there's a lot of areas where Iran can respond to its acute water crisis. Still, though, it has to deal with the challenges of climate change, heat waves, as I told you, breaking over 122 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas, intensive drought consecutively for the last 6 years. I mean, these are real problems as well, and
Yes,
they're going
real
to
problems.
demand a smart and dynamic response.
All right. If you had something to pick to flush, the environmental coffee house flush of the day, what would you flush, Antonio?
Well, I would flush cash crops absorbing all of the water resources. And a lot of that money doesn't actually go back to help the population. And that's a big problem when we see these industries develop, is that they use a lot of resources from the population, but they return very little resources to the population, to certain sectors. Certain parts of government officials absolutely are making fantastic heyday from these cash crops, but the population of itself doesn't really take advantage of this. So we need crops to grow that are going to be beneficial for the domestic population and less so for elites in the society. So
All right.
I would flush alfalfa. I would flush any cash crop that is absorbing too much of this water.
All right, here we go.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, don't actually flush alfalfa down the.
No, don't do that. Don't
Because
do
that would
that.
back your water system up.
Right.
If you want to waste water, flush alfalfa.
All right. Well, I see that the chat has been so busy, and I
Oh, wow,
haven't,
okay.
I have not had time to actually really respond to anybody. I just, in the interest of time, we're trying to keep the show, a little bit shorter. No flush, not enough water. I screwed up. I screwed up the whole thing. I didn't fix I didn't fix this. So everybody's, oh, wait, there we go. All right, so we could see a few comments. Why not? We'll take a few comments. I had one that I did. This is Shalal Bella. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. I don't know whose quote that was.
Well, I would say it's not even the response of, it's not what scientists do, right? Scientists
Right.
aren't engaged in spiritual healing. But I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the problems that we have come from ignorance, greed, and apathy.
Ignorance, greed, and apathy. It's seems to be the human conditions. I love this one. That's why you close the lid when you flush. Look at all those particulates. I know. Well, when I have to tell you, when I got that video, it was during the height of the pandemic. And I originally used I think I was using that video to illustrate that very point. So thank you. I'm so
Yeah.
glad that we can at least bring a smile at the end of the show, and have something to laugh at, because it's a very serious show. And I just want to say, I really do appreciate you so much, Tony, and your work, and your intelligence and your depth of knowledge. We are going to be going, everybody, to an every other Sunday format with Tony. So we won't be back together next Sunday. I probably will. We'll see how my as the time rolls on, because I have planting season, so I may have to do these earlier. I don't know. We'll take it one day at a time. So we will be every other Sunday. And again, I started Political Coffee House. Don't forget, I'm trying to keep up with all of that. Political Coffee House, where I don't have to make y'all crazy on this channel with my focuses and ramblings on the political scene, because politics right now in our country, I mean, it's what's for dinner. I mean, that's, we're at a critical time. So I thank you all. And Tony, one more, you can end the show, wrap it up.
Well, thank you guys for joining us here on the Environmental Coffee House, talking about the water crisis that faced the Middle East and in particular Iran. But I want to leave with an inspiring message. One of the things I wanted to highlight is how much opportunity there is to make an impact here. And the Iranians are flushed with as many crises as they do potentials to solve those crises. With smart planning, a cultural and spiritual change, I think they'll be able to do it.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you. We really, we love you. We love you and we appreciate you. Na, na.